Okay, everyone, I think we will get going. Hello and welcome. My name is Natalie Raymond. I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us on day 2 of Enterprise Data World Digital and this afternoon's session, a 12-step program for improving organizational data literacy. Just a few logistical things to get us started. Due to the large number of people on these sessions, we do mute you during the presentation. You're welcome to chat, though. Go ahead and use that chat window to communicate with each other and us. Just a note, Zoom does default to sending those chats only to us panelists, so make sure you change it to everyone so everyone can hear your thoughts. For questions, we'd like you to use the Q&A section. Both of those little guys are located center of your screen. You can also tweet us if you're a tweeter using hashtag EDW. As always, we will send a follow-up email within 2 weeks containing links to video, slides, and anything else that might have been requested during the session. You can also view the video and slides here in the platform until April 30th. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce to our speaker, Peter Akin. Peter is the founding director of VCU Anything Awesome. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you, Natalie. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today, even if we can't quite meet in person. Notice I'm not wearing a mask, but I'm still at home, so I guess we're okay on that. But hopefully we'll all be getting together at the next one of these things, which is coming up in June. Meanwhile, just to give a brief introduction to myself, I've been in this space for so many years I can't even count, and this would be my, I think, 26th consecutive Enterprise Data World, although I'm not sure about the number exactly on that. Those of you that don't know me, I'm a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. I also have other appointments, including the president of DAMA International around this. I've got a number of books that may be of interest. We have some event pricing right at the moment, but that's not really what you're here to talk about. Instead, you're going to listen to me gripe about the ways in which organizations are told to become data-driven. Now, this is a Gartner piece, and I'm a very big Gartner fan, but unfortunately, this Gartner guidance here is all about a focus on you. So it's you as a data leader, what you should do. And I'm not going to walk you through these because that's not what the focus of this talk is about. These are still good, but instead I'm going to look at it a little bit differently. So first of all, the idea of using a 12-step program seems to make sense to people on this in a couple of different ways. But even recognizing that our 12-step programs are the best thing we've come up with to dissuade others from harmful behavior, and they have a 30% success rate. So this is not something that's actually quite successful, but it's the best we've got at the moment, kind of like democracy. You know, all the other systems are worse. But democracy is kind of a mess too. So while we can go down through these 12 steps in a 12-step program, it's also important to point out that there's actually something called cognitive behavioral therapy that is, in fact, showing a better series of requests from strange places in all of that. That said, again, we're not here to talk about the focus on us, but really how to look at it from an organizational perspective. And I started using the words 12-step because I found that at my age, and I'm kind of old if you guys don't know, when you're sitting around a table with a bunch of smart people, there's always 1 or 2 people that have had some experience with 12-step programs. And they will do this nod. Okay, this is not like other corporate initiatives. This is something really significant. And I think that's the main difference that I'm trying to get across here. So while I have the 12 steps, and we'll walk through them in the next 50 minutes or so, it's also important to understand that these are really the things that the organization is going to have to do. So it's great if they hire you as that data leader for the organization, but this is what you bring. This is the deal. This is the ask, if you will, the request going into management to say, here's what I want in return. If you want us to get better with data, this is what you're going to have to pay attention to. So here's our plan for the 50-minute session here. Again, starting out with the very basics, stating that the organization has a data problem. Now, I've worked with lots of organizations, and my numbers essentially come out like this. Out of 100 organizations that are trying to do this, 10 are making a serious effort, and one of those is succeeding well. Now, I've seen thousands of organizations, so I've seen a lot of good organizations working within that construct, but most organizations are really challenged in that area. So the first step is admitting a problem. Now, we'll put it in a sample organizational statement or whatever, and poor Kermit there is obviously passed out in the corner. But this is hard for organizations because people feel that admitting there's a challenge reflects poorly on them. I would suggest that not reflecting on yourself and instead blame it 100% on those of us in the academic community who for the past 30 years have ignored the growing problem of data and data-related problems and instead told people that the answer to every problem is a brand new relational database management system. Now, if we've taught them that for the 30 years, and by the way, it's generally the only thing we've taught most IT and computer systems professionals about this, why should we be surprised that there are then so many challenges out there? But it is important to understand that this is a systemic problem that has nothing necessarily to do with the organization. When you consider that 99% of the data on the planet Earth was created in the last 2 years, it's easy to see why this is an overwhelming type of a problem. One of the first steps in admitting there's a problem, too, is not to go with the tried and true cliches. Data is not and will never be the new oil. Thank you, Doug Laney, for the guidance around that. I like to say it's more of the new soil. And in fact, I will correct people when they say that, because data is a production, oil is a production function where we are pushing something to somebody and we expect to use it exactly once. Most of us do not think about recycling the petrol that's in our automobiles, although we're getting better about recycling the oil that's in our cars. The planting in the soil analogy can't be accomplished without some foundational preparation, and that's an important step. We don't just fling seeds about the yard and expect good results, and nobody plants things on Monday and expects to be fed on Friday. So it's a matter of saying it's a problem, it's an ingrained problem, and it's not going to be solved by Friday. I've got 3 quotes that I want to talk about in order to do this, and it's kind of a base level buy-in in working with these. All organizational challenges have a data root. It can't be a problem unless we're talking about data, and having a data root in these problems is one of the first steps to recognizing how this stuff works. The second quote is one that's kind of a mentality quote. It's impossible for anyone to begin to learn that which he thinks he already knows, from Epictetus in there. Again, if your mind is full, then it's impossible to put something else in it. And this is really the problem that we have with most of our organizations. They think if you just hire a data person, buy some data stuff, you will know everything that you need to know, and you can't learn anything new. If your organization is going to try it in this fashion internally around that, I would advise to look at some other external resources, consultants, benchmarking, training, just as you're doing with this Enterprise Data World Digital Conference that we're all participating in today. And to say to people, we have a data problem, it's not bad. Most people, you can say Peter says it, right? 99 out of 100 organizations have data challenges that they're trying to work with in order to get better about it. So let's move a little bit further. The second step in a 12-step program is to understand that the organization is responsible for its data assets. It's not a case of you can blame it externally. We've kept these things internally for a long time. So step 2 is the idea that data and understanding data as a really core issue in this is going to be very important, and that we're ready to improve whatever data practices that we have by scoping and executing one cycle of a data management strategy. And those of you that have talked to me about data strategy understand how we approach that process, because what's true in our organizations is that they are full of what Tom Redmond has so correctly labeled hidden data factories. These add unnecessary costs. They result in mediation that is being applied at the work group level as opposed to at the organizational level. And that's a huge cost because everybody learns, and some people apply it correctly, some people don't apply it correctly, but there's differentiation that occurs in all of these. And nobody gets better at recognizing these two problems because they're focused in on the one that's in front of them instead of realizing that this business problem over here is related to that organizational IT problem on the other side, because they both have the same root cause in the data of the organization. In order to make this effort sustainable, and I have been to cities like Indianapolis 3 times to do the same thing for certain companies in there, and I keep asking them, well, why didn't it stick the first time? They said, well, you know, something went wrong, we had to fire that group and we're starting all over again, but we still want you back to train the next group. It's like, gosh, that's so inefficient around there. See, data can't be approached as a project. There's no way it has beginnings and ends that are not clearly identified. Where does data begin? Where does data end? Now, projects begin and end. That's one of the differentiating pieces with a project versus a program, which is really what we need to be talking about from the data perspective. And a phrase that has been helpful in step 2 for organizations is that you will no longer need a data program when you no longer need your HR group or your finance group. After all, nobody says, hey, I think that everybody's going to behave, we don't need any more lawyers, and everything's going to be fine, so let's lay off the HR group next time, right? They've managed to instantiate themselves. And by the way, story from John Ladley, the HR groups in the past were also differentiated and distributed and diffused the way data was. So we want to follow that same pathway. But programs require ongoing support if we're going to make them work in any fashion that's going to require some sort of sustainability. Our third step then is to secure board level commitment. It is no longer acceptable to get the CEO and stop there. In fact, the board is more likely to be aware of what's going on. And in order to do that, it helps organizationally to commit to some sort of a doctrine. Now, again, the doctrine is the idea that we're going to have some sort of programmatic approach, not a project. We've already talked about HR and finance in there, but it's resourced for the duration. You will no longer need a data program when you no longer need an HR program in your organizations. And the sooner people recognize that, the better off the organization will be. We need to determine what are the alternative courses for the organization, which one is the correct one in order for us to go forward, and make some sort of progress so that we can understand how we are doing relative to our objectives. Now, what you'll see is an awful lot of folks out there writing data stuff. Again, data-driven, data-centric, data-focused, data-first, data-provocateur. These are great words. They are great sentiments, but I'm pretty sure that as soon as you start to scratch the surface, nobody has any idea what any of that means. So I took some time with my co-author, Todd Harbour, and we looked, first of all, at the one thing that has made a difference in software. Now, we're not going to say that all of the software problems are solved. Software is still a good candidate for improvement around this, but there's no question that the Agile Manifesto has been the best thing to help us create higher quality software faster with fewer errors in it. And the manifesto is very simple. You're looking at the entire manifesto right there. You can still get to it by going to the agilemanifesto.org and taking a look. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and by helping others do it. Through this work, we've come to value, and what they have are a series of 4 sentences that you can see in front of you, with things on the left emphasized and the things on the right at the normal size type. In other words, while there is value to processes, tools, comprehensive documentation, contract negotiations, and following a plan, the folks that adhere to the Agile Software Manifesto value individuals and interactions, working software, customer collaboration, and responding to organizational change over following plans around this. So our data doctrine is built very similarly, and I'll go through them just very, very briefly on this. It's out there as well. You can get to it by looking at the data-doctrine.com in this case. Didn't decide to org that one. So we're uncovering better ways of developing it. Here are my 4 statements, and there's the we like this stuff better than we like the stuff on the left on here. The idea is that when we are prioritizing things, we have prioritized a new upgrade or a new IT program many, many times over a data program. Again, hundreds of times that we've seen this. That informed information investing should absolutely trump technology acquisition, because the technology, the new technology, the old technology is still going to be dealing with poorer quality data. That we really want to have stable, shared organizational data over IT evaluation. The newest version of Salesforce is not going to help us if we still have Salesforce filled up with poor quality data. And finally, the, of course, goal of data management is to promote data reuse. So rather than going out and trying to get a bunch more data, we should practice doing our reuse in this area in a way that will give us a lot more focus around this. Much more out there on the data doctrine. Again, it's obviously there's a book behind all of this, so you can take a look there if you're interested on it. The next step up is an inventory. Again, these are directly from the 12-step pieces. And the question is, begin to accumulate and understand your data assets. Now, this is different because most organizations take this on also as a project. Instead, what I would say is that we need to start the process and have a very important conversation with the bosses and the board in particular. Now, I mentioned previously too, it's not enough to get CEO executive support at this point, because the CEOs sometimes come and go. But if you've got a board that understands this, that board is interacting with other organizations and are much more likely to have encountered good organizational data practices as opposed to poor quality ones, to recognize that and to be able to drive this into the organization past the CEO down to the data leadership that needs to happen. But of course, a CEO conversation might be, oh, good, when are you going to be done inventorying your data? By Friday? You can quote me on this. There's not an organization on the planet that has ever completed a data inventory, which in case the CEO goes, oh, why are we doing this? And the answer is, well, we can't use our data assets if we don't know they exist. So a little bit on the data inventory. Again, when will it be done? It sounds like it's going to be a task or a project. It is not. Data is not a project. I've said it 3 times now. The key is to reframe the question and say, how rapidly can we achieve the required capabilities of being able to put in a catalog somewhere where we can gain access to various data items and data information around this? What sort of pre-existing classification frameworks? And there's lots of talks at this session and others where they'll be talking about taxonomies and organizing paradigms in order to do this. And then we need to reassess it on a regular basis because sometimes things change. So here's a bit. Those of you that have seen my talks before know I like to give you guys lots of things to take away. Here's a wonderful way of approaching a sample data inventory. The idea is, of course, first of all, let's change from definitions to purpose statements. This was something that Clive Finkelstein taught me many years ago, and I don't see it picked up. People want to define things and say a bed is something to sleep in. Well, that's nice, but if you say the bed is for purpose of tracking patients in a hospital, it's a very different motivation than the rest of it. So again, what's the rationale? What are the strategic elements? What are we trying to achieve? We need to understand data that is shared externally. We need to understand data that is shared within the organization. We need to be able to classify data that is supporting the development of items that are shared. And we need to get items that support work group activities. We need to understand ROT. ROT is a wonderful term. I've been credited with it. I did not invent it. I got it from somewhere else, and I haven't been able to find out where I stole it from, but it's definitely not mine. ROT stands for data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial, and that is 80% of your data minimum. The only argument I ever get on a ROT call is somebody saying our data is 90% rot instead of 80% rot. So right away, we're talking about managing 4/5 of the data that is providing no value to your organization at all. We need to start defining subject areas around this. We need to identify, dedupe, and harmonize, looking for golden sources, deciding which one is the correct one or the best one that we should do. We need to identify sensitive or personal data items and specific controls that need to be put in place in order to do this. And finally, we need to come up with mapping rules that allow you to do this. Again, do that for a data inventory. You can get a lot of it done quickly, but you will probably, as I said before, never finish. But what you will have is the ability to produce charts such as this one, which says, here's who's using who else's data around the organization. Again, these are not real numbers here, but wouldn't it be great to have numbers like this so that you could say, hey, this data is coming from here and going to here, and you can see how other uses of it are in that entire process. The key, of course, for all of this is that architectures exist no matter what. All organizations have business, they have process, they have systems, they have security, they have technical, and of course, data and information architectures. Some are understood and documented and therefore more useful. However, if your architecture is not documented, it cannot be useful to the organization in the way the organization would like to use it. A very specific definition of understanding an architecture, which is documented and articulated as a digital blueprint, illustrating the commonalities and interconnections of the various architectural components. Most importantly, though, it's shared not just between people and machines, but also among business and technical users in the process. So that sharing is the key portion for all of that. It is important at step 5 to understand a ritual bad data accounting exercise and to practice it. I've been to many organizations where they will celebrate. Yes, we used to do things badly this way, and this was the cost of doing them badly. Because when you do that, it demonstrates that you're not doing it anymore. That's great. But also, you're getting better at quantifying and qualifying the various data improvements. And you can start adding to the costs. I had one organization that told me they made a quality improvement 20 years ago, and that improvement, they're still using the savings from it to contribute to the cost, because if they said if we had bad data take up, those costs would come right back to us. Again, the goal is not a final count of the data deficit practices. It's mainly just trying to say, once a year, periodically, we'll get together and say, we used to do it badly in the past, and look at the changes we've made in this particular piece going forward, and things will be better from this point on. Constant reinforcement, of course, with the message. For example, this is a story from one organization that I've worked with over the years. Why would a knowledge worker with a PhD in chemical engineering need to know whether a product called FoxPro is Y2K compliant? My guess is that most of the PhDs in chemical engineering have never heard of Y2K. Those of you that are not familiar with it, I've got a little note on the slide here, but it was basically we were using 2 digits to represent a 4-digit year, and that didn't work out so well in the process. So these ritual exercises of what we need to do around all this, sorry, I went backwards a slide there. Let me go to the next one forward. We'll be back on track. There we go. Important to periodically celebrate this and to say, hey, we've been doing it badly, but we're doing better this year. And by the way, here's some new things that we added to this new set of practices that we're doing in this year. 6th step, assess your current capabilities. Do you have good data practices that can replace the bad data practices? And the reason that buying technology doesn't work, which is the simplest solution that most organizations attempt to buy, they go out and spend money with one of our wonderful vendors on a product, but not really knowing how to use it. Again, not a good idea around that. So the idea is, do we understand what is the total extent of our current data debt? And our current data debt is what we have to suffer through from years and years of doing things incorrectly. So we want to assess our capabilities against some objective standards and report on that progress. it does require the organization to be more literate all the way around, and to allow folks to go out and seed various resources by improving knowledge worker and data professional literacy around here. We want to improve the inter-data silo communications among the various team members, to let people know there are ways they can go and get help, and that there is a group in the organization that's dedicated to doing just exactly that process, to include them in collaborative critical design reviews of the process. It's funny, my students in class this semester are having to deal with ethics on the very first set of requirements around this. Good stuff, exactly what we want to have in here. So let's replace those bad practices with good ones. And then 12-step program, that's why they hang out and drink coffee a lot, right? Because they're replacing some bad habits with some habits that'll be better for them. Again, most people aren't aware that everything that a computer does produces data. And these could be log files or other things that go on, but still problematically record many, many things and give us access to a whole bunch of data that we haven't been utilizing in the long run. Step 7 is implement useful crowdsourcing. And this is the idea that, yes, we have some experts that are here and we have some business folks, but we also have some problems that are challenging around all of this. So we're asking for these data management capabilities. Most organizations have been saying data is everybody's responsibility. Well, guess what? That hasn't worked out so well, has it? Everybody's responsibility means it's somebody else's responsibility, right? That nobody's actually paying any attention to these things. Useful, targeted crowdsourcing of various practices can be done in a way so that everybody can implement them. We may only do it in one department and let them work on it for a year and then have those practices to show out. It's critical that the organization sponsor internal data meetups so that people who are interested in data have a place to go where they can access expertise and share best practices around the organization. It's very much a team sport in that sense. It also requires data passion, deliberate, that's a error right there, it shouldn't be a period, it's a comma, deliberate, educated, and celebrate past happenings around that, keeping everybody involved on a ritual basis. So whatever the date is of your annual data thing, take a day to sit back, take a step, and celebrate on that. Let me give you a couple of specific examples of a knowledge worker and what they should have in there in terms of the knowledge data areas. A knowledge worker should understand the concept of data stewardship, what that involves. You're working on somebody else's data on behalf of the organization or whatever the particular arrangement is, that they need to have a sense of being able to demonstrate value in that process, that their methods need to be current, that you can't apply last year's methods to this and expect it to work. And more importantly, last year's set of technologies, that you do have a specific fiduciary set of responsibilities in the organization, and that we're all swimming in the same swimming pool. And if we're not, again, it's not a recognition of the way it happens. So that shared fate, very, very critical in order to do that. Number 8, committing to remediate. This is the idea that we've got folks that we've done, we don't necessarily know who best benefits from our data, but that's a really critical portion of data stewardship, is to say, where is the data coming from and where is it going to next? And oh, by the way, what am I doing to it as well? It's just a non-trivial set of constructs to keep in there. The organization has to start codifying this to make it understood. And the way to look for these projects particularly is to start out with what is going to further the organizational strategy. The whole purpose of a data strategy is to use your data to help the organization achieve its strategic objectives. And that's a whole universe of things that everybody would like to do, but I'm going to Venn diagram it here by saying, and also we want to improve some of the data that solves an immediate business problem as well. And notice our possibility has gotten smaller around that. I'm going to put a third component up there as well, which is to say that particularly for organizations that are starting out, find a project, there are lots of them, that will allow you to practice needed data skills in your organization. And this is what we call a lighthouse model for finding that sweet spot in there and getting a good start on it. Let me give you one specific example here. This is a logistics company that I worked with a number of years ago, and I found a room where they had 100 associates who were correcting data on all of their invoices. And I said, you know, we could fix those data quality problems and you wouldn't have to have this room. And the manager that was in charge said, no, I like this. I'm getting ready to hire another 100 people. This is the best quarter, the best year I've had. So I'm going to put some more people in this particular room. Well, again, very good communications, but not effective in this case. So instead, I marched down the hall and have a conversation with the CFO and said, do you realize that this process that you've put in place is delaying your cash flow by 30 days on a $9 billion annual spend? And she looked at me and without missing a beat said, if you can solve that in 1 month for less than $800 million, you've actually got a positive return on your investment. Those are good numbers and your CFO will be able to pay attention to them. Problem is that when we look at the general definition of data literacy, we've got this sort of vague thing out there. It's a broad challenge, wide variability, can't really be a binary sort of an approach. The ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data. You know, yes, it's the one that everybody uses, but I don't think it's quite as useful as it could be. Here's another definition for it. Again, just a very, very big, complicated piece. Probably not going to work for most of our knowledge workers. In fact, when I've looked over the literacy efforts of many organizations and many research efforts, I find that they just don't matter because they're not addressing something that is material or it is inessential at this point in time. So what, of course, we need to do is to find out what does matter and to make it material and essential in the process. And the way we're going to move the needle on this is pretty simple. There are 7.7 billion people on the planet. 2.5 billion of them have a mobile device connected to the internet. 1.5 billion of those are knowledge workers, and 1 billion of those, are adults. 1 billion of those are knowledge workers. So rather than simply say whether somebody is data literate or not, we've come up with a scale that makes a little bit more sense. The idea is that mobile data spreaders and adult data spreaders are generally beyond our control. So we draw a line there and hope that parental pressure and things like that will actually make a difference there, but we can't legislate them. Interestingly enough, there are two additional components that work in sync here. One of them is at levels 1 and 2, your goal is to avoid being fooled or manipulated by data, and that your behavioral focus is internal on yourself, because that's, of course, what we're looking at. But by the time we get up to a knowledge worker, data teacher, or all data professionals, and I include everybody that counts himself as a data professional in here, the focus then changes to being, to avoid fooling or manipulating society, and that these are best way of assessing this, and that the behavioral focus can in fact be mandated to be behavioral, organizational in focus, because we can make them sign codes of conduct, employment agreements, etc., to allow us to focus in on these pieces. I mentioned also that they're the first line of defense on this. Yes, it is absolutely appropriate to start talking about data ethics to everybody in the organization that deals with data. That would be all of the organizational knowledge workers. And replacing should I thinking, can I think with should I thinking in the process. It's now mandatory for my classes to watch the Netflix coded bias special. If you haven't had a chance to see that, it's a wonderful little piece. A little bit more about all of this in a case study that we don't have time enough to go for here, but it's a no registration, no cost case study. Just navigate to that link and download it. You'll get a lot more information. We need to develop self-funding around this, and we've got to become good at it. There are lots and lots of value items in your data and your data practices, and those amends will help us execute these improvements and give us a good return on our investment. So we get prioritization, remediation steps that allow to combine and optimize. And I'll give you an example of that in just a minute here, but it gives you a baseline for the organization to start saying, what should we be doing in order to do this? The analogy I like to use here is a musical one. Now, Bruce Springsteen's band is, of course, a marvelous band, and they can take any song in the world and make it sound fabulous. The key, of course, here to this is that you have to practice. And this is the part that most organizations forget. While they do some of this, they don't keep the sustainment up in order to run this on a long-term basis. Number 10, targeted teaching with continuous feedback and evaluation. I guarantee you that most of our knowledge workers have been underserved by those of us in the academic community by teaching you that the only answer to every data problem is a brand new relational database. It's the only thing we teach them. Why would they expect to learn anything else from this? And that is just absolutely nuts. So we've got to commit the resources in there, prioritize practices, assessments, understand data as a programmatic activity, and then perhaps look at some things that have changed in our lifetime. Again, in my own lifetime, we've gone from 78s to cassette tapes to 8-tracks to MP3s to lossless to streaming. That's enough to confuse an old person like me. We're going to see those kinds of changes continue in here. The number of devices that we have is prohibitive and complex. We couldn't possibly maintain all of that. And this incorrectly accounted expense requires knowledge workers to deal with things that they shouldn't normally have to do. Data management programs have to take a long-term view in order to do this. And the focus on knowledge worker productivity is as simple as one click removed from any repetitive process, but repeated over and over and over again allows us to add these things up. Those of you that are interested in a little further on that, there's a wonderful book called The Goal, which introduces something called the theory of constraints and says in any system, such as a data system, there's at least one thing in there that is blocking us. Find it, fix it, and move on to the next in order to do this. I'll also take a dig at data teachers here. And again, this is probably not most people who are involved in dataversity because y'all know better. But you can go to other places where the data teaching is subpar, particularly at our undergraduate levels in universities. Again, I don't expect you to read all this, but there is some substance out there that we need to have, which talks even about certification of teachers. We then at step 11 need to improve our additional capabilities. And if this looks a whole lot like plan, do, check, act, right? It is. It's a very good piece. Demonstrate that commitment, focus on the community-wide efforts in order to do this, and access those prioritized efficiencies so that you can institutionalize this wonderful cycle in order to do this. I want to show a little piece here that was tossed out by Mark Johnson, who's a friend and colleague, and he was doodling one day in one of these online sessions. So I haven't even seen Mark for 2 years, right? But hopefully we'll all get together at some point in the future. But he's writing down something I thought was very instructive. He said, when you subtract data from digital, I'm not sure what you have left over, but I certainly understand that if you subtract digital from data, the data will still be there. You see, the challenge with digital, which is what all of your organizations are focusing on, is that it just isn't possible to go digital without spelling data correctly. Putting on our data ears, another way that we say it, it requires much more work in order to do this. And to give you an example of how bad it is, this is a very recent piece that came off of LinkedIn. Somebody said, if you've got wonderful ice cream and you feed it into anything awesome, you're going to end up with wonderful ice cream on the other side of it. And the observation to this individual was, this is true with blockchain and it's true without blockchain, which means it was a recent revelation for this individual. And I think that's a crime. Literally, we shouldn't have people not understanding at that level. Garbage in, garbage out is something we've understood for years and years. And the reason most digital initiatives are failing is because we have garbage data and the perfect model, which gives us garbage digital results. And that's true whether we have a data warehouse in the middle, machine learning, business intelligence, blockchain, AI, whatever buzzword it is that you want to think of in order to come up with these pieces. And this is really how it looks in most organizations. We're doing many of these things, perhaps even simultaneously. Consequently, if we start to clean up the quality of the data that is coming into this, we can harmonize the data flows in here. And I've helped organizations save billions of dollars by just changing the way in which they're moving their data around in their organization without any thought to improving their practices or anything else. You're simply sending data down, and you're sending it down once or twice. Why do it twice? It's twice as expensive. Once you get that part done, you can start putting the quality data in place and try to get some quality digital results. The one area that we're having huge problems with right at the moment is machine learning, because all the machine learning algorithms are what we call training algorithms. And these training algorithms require us to have data, and the data that they need is not available. So all of the progress in machine learning today is absolutely stopped. Just data treated as an asset? Should you have executives that support data as an asset? Does the organization track usage of the asset? Is the organization having controls in place in order to measure and manage this? Are the controls actually executed? Is there general acceptance of the need to manage this as an asset? And do you have serious discussions about this asset at senior management meetings? Thanks to Chris Bradley for that wonderful quick list in there to help do this. Finally, the last step is to start evangelizing and helping other people to understand the pervasiveness of existing data debt, that we need to contribute to the professional, and that these addresses have lots of things that are not easy to identify around all of this. There are some very big challenges for work leaders. There's a workforce resistance, lack of champions, incorporating new data and governance pieces, securities, but the most important thing is to understand that buying technology generally will not solve your data problem. It's just not, again, as a case of garbage in and garbage out. So we've gone through the 12 steps, and we're getting close to the end here. So I'll give a shout out to everybody and say, look, if you've got some questions and things, please put them in the Q&A as I go through this brief review here, and we'll get down to look and see what sort of questions you guys have. Those of you that understand my models that I use, I've seen also that we've put this into a 5-step piece, which is a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The most important things we can do are at the bottom of the pyramid, and they represent and correspond to the physiological, or in this case, the mobile data spreaders. This will help to eliminate bad behavior on that part. That if we move it up a little bit further, we'll get to adult data spreaders. And again, this is about the organization understanding safety, because if you are not safe, you can never be part of something that is larger than yourself. So this is where the knowledge workers come into play. They realize now that they are an integral part of our data ecosystem. And if we have knowledge workers making up things instead of doing it the way we'd like to, we're probably going to end up with varied and uneven results. And we do have to get up to a self-esteem level around this. And this is really a focus on data teachers right at this point. Again, I've been beating up on them for quite some time because we don't have good standards in place. And so if people don't know that they don't know, they end up teaching things incorrectly. And yes, there are lots of examples of really well-intentioned teachers incorrectly teaching people about data. Finally, we want to get to that self-actualization piece, or what the TED Talks now call flow. You're in the flow. It's really getting out and beyond this. You've turned the corner. You've now gotten to a place where you can do things in a very interesting, more productive fashion all the way around. Mentioned before, there's some event pricing. All this stuff is in the book, and we get to the point where we can now stop for a brief minute and see if you guys have any commercials. Commercials, questions. Where did I get commercials from?
Commercials on the brain. There are a handful of questions. We'll go through just which are most upvoted first, since I don't think we'll have time for all of them. This is from an anonymous attendee. They say, so my organization has admitted the problem. Senior leaders are committed to it. We've assessed many in the workforce have a low level of data literacy. What can we really do about it? No more blue sky ambitions or overarching goals. What do people need to know? Send them to Data Literacy 101 training, Excel pivot tables, Tableau. We know it doesn't work. What does at a tactical level?
That's a great question. And I think that the number one issue in HR training today is data literacy. So I hate to say buy my book, but buy my book. What we did is focus on the specific behaviors, objective characteristic behaviors that somebody who understands. Again, a interesting test question is if somebody sends you a request for data sharing and they say yes, no, whatever the response is, or only while I'm using the app, they don't realize that that's a license to do this forever and ever. My iPhone yesterday said, weather has used your location 69 times over the past 6 days. Are you okay with that? And I'm okay with that because I like to know when it's going to rain. Remember, I have horses, so that's an important consideration for all of this. That said, it's also very problematic to have these data literacy pieces focused in on statistics and as the question was, Power BI or whatever the stack is. No, these are behaviors. So I had another app that was tracking things and I put it on a different phone so it wouldn't be mine, and it tracked me 14,000 times in a single day. 14,000 times. That's the level of literacy that we're looking at, and those are the skills. I don't have time to go through them here, but I can promise you that the book has some very specific things in it. Thank you for the question. I guess they should all be anonymous if we're doing a 12-step here, right, Natalie?
I probably, yes. Apologies for the cameo from my cat just now.
Oh, we love the cats.
Another question coming in from Warwick. How do you make public sector data, e.g. data on crashes, self-funding?
I'm not sure I understood the data on crashes, but I absolutely have worked with a lot of organizations that have taken their data and monetized it in a very useful fashion. Again, just imagine the following headline appearing in your local newspaper. Local DMV gets caught selling data to an insurance company, right? And turn that headline around the other way, which should really be local DMV saves taxpayers thousands or millions of dollars by legally selling anonymized data to insurance companies so that they can help lower insurance rates throughout the state. It's a perception thing, and we need to be working on it from that level. Public data has absolutely very good capability to be monetized in this area. And if you look at the FIPA law, if you're in the federal government, there's actually almost a mandate for that.
Okay, great, thank you. There's another question here. Do you have more examples of factors for self-funding? Is it from mitigating expense or generating revenue?
Well, you've hit the actual piece of that, right? So you only have two choices. You can either make things faster, better, and cheaper, or you can do some new stuff. And there is no other option. We've looked at strategy for years and years, and those are the two variables that come out to play. I would suggest sequencing them perhaps would probably be safer for an organization starting out. If you have things that are going on and you have, again, I had an organization that had a query that ran 30 billion times a day. And 30 billion times a day, even if I just save a tiny fraction of that, it adds up. And that added up to storage costs, it added up to all sorts of processing time, and it added up to faster return on investment in there. It's not to say that we don't want to do anything innovative with data. Of course we do. We want to do wonderful, innovative things with it. But the faster, better, cheaper stuff comes along and will get attention a lot more quickly. And the organizations that try to do both at the same time, they just go crazy.
Another question from Mona. I see data governance management leaders owning data literacy. What is your view on who should own the data literacy initiative that drives the data culture?
Mona, thank you for a great question. Yes, I would suggest that's where you need to have the board mandating that the CEO put this on their important piece, including the CEO becoming more data literate. So again, there are lots of courses out there that will teach you data literacy. I'm not sure what the contents of many of those courses are. Things like, can you do math and things like that? And that's not going to get it. We need to focus on behaviors, on things that knowledge workers do so that the knowledge workers will do them better, more accurately.
Okay, another from our anonymous friend. How would you introduce the 12-step process to a company that works agile?
Agile is a wonderful way to develop things faster, but Agile operates at a different cadence, a different rhythm than does data. And so the best thing you can do to help your Agile process is to separate it from your data process and to take those two pieces and to separate them into two distinct parts. Data at the programmatic level is developing shared components. And if you don't have a shared component, you shouldn't be developing software in order to do this. There are things in your organization right now that are shared, and you can start with those. So very, very nice fit between the two of those, but only if you separate them. If you try to do data in an Agile sprint in 2 weeks, tell me which company it is and I'll sell your stock short. That's a terrible thing to say, but it can become as practical as that.
Great, thank you so much. There's one more question. We have just a couple minutes left. Lots of people want to know, what software are you using to show your video slide?
Don't worry, this will be coming to PowerPoint soon. So I'm actually fooling my internet connection. I live in rural Virginia, and I have 2 megabits to the desktop and 0.3 going back up. So what I'm doing, this is Keynote for the Macintosh, but there will be a feature in PowerPoint very soon that will allow you to do this live video as a part of it as well. So just hang tight if you're not already a Mac user. If you're a Mac user, Keynote is free, and it's called Live Video.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Peter, for this great presentation. And thanks to all the attendees for chiming in chat. Some good conversations happening there.
And hopefully we'll all be together next year, right?
Fingers crossed. We've linked a survey in the chat, so you can leave your review of this session and the Wednesday sessions. Please do. That's very helpful. The next session is going to begin very shortly at 1:30. It's a keynote. Get excited. And don't forget to check out the Solution Center for the latest and greatest in data management products and solutions. Enjoy the keynote. Thank you so much for attending.